In this lesson, I just want to do an overview of grid lines. So it doesn't really matter what you draw. You really should use grid lines. You don't have to see them or print them or plot them, and you can make them look just about any way you want. But you really should have them, and especially everyone knows the structural stuff tends to tie to it. So the columns and the beams and the edge of the floor slabs, and you can tie stuff and offset it from the grid line. It doesn't have to be on the grid line. It can be, constrained to the outside so that it's 300 millimeters or a foot past it or something like that. So you can definitely constrain and tie your elements and object and sketch lines, which we'll talk about. If I click on this stair and you say edit sketch, then you go in and you're actually editing that stairway, at which point you go into sketch mode, and then you can, at this level you can start to constrain that, and then when you finish your sketch you can click out, and then kind of nested within that set of stairs is a constraint talking to the grid lines and stuff like that. So there's a lot of tie into the structural, and the grid lines basically are drawn in a plan view or an elevation or a section, and they basically go vertically up, and you can create grid lines that are at an angle or also arced. So they can be straight and they can be different types of arcs, and you just start to pick and place them, and we'll talk about the fundamentals of putting grid lines in a little bit later. I'm going to hit escape once and escape again. So we have grid lines available here, and level lines once you get into a section or an elevational view. And the structural stuff, columns, as I said, and beams and stuff, when you go to place a column, if you grab that column and you say create similar, which means give me one of these, they'll really snap to grid lines quite nicely, like especially at center lines and stuff. And you can also grab grid lines and say populate all intersections with a certain column. So really nice feature. So you can place the grid lines in early and then literally grab all the columns or all the grid lines and say put this column in all those locations, and go back and fine tune it from there. So very good to have our grid lines in, and then we dimension them, and then we can turn the little grid bubble on or off at the ends of each grid line. We'll talk about the visibility aspect of grid lines. I'm just kind of panning through here. How you can take this and you can turn the little bubble on, and then you can grip this, and what this alignment tool, there's a bunch of little doohickeys here on the end of the grid line. So there's the little squiggle line which breaks it, makes it into a dog leg, and then there's this control and this control and this control, and then there's whether it's on or not, and the 3D button, and then the alignment. So there's a bunch of lovely little settings in there at the end of that, so we'll teach you that, and that is similar to the end point of a level line. You'll notice there's some similarity in there as far as the little controls that are available at the ends of grid lines and level lines, and that's why I like to group the grid lines and level lines together, because they're very similar. They behave their display ability is very similar, and they behave similar. Levels are a little more powerful because nothing by nature, when you click on here, it will not tell you what grid line is nearby. Even if you pick this column, unless they've done something new, it's not going to report back here the name of the grid line intersection without doing something pretty fancy inside of there. However, if you pick on the column, and I'm going to use my tab button because it's too busy. See, tab on the keyboard, click, and I pick on it and it shows me the properties. It's definitely going to show me the base and top of the column location inside of here. So grid lines, we will go into more detail about controlling them. Notice you get these wonderful little temporary dimensions. Whenever you pick an object, it'll show you some temporary dimensions, and we'll talk about that as well. So grid lines, they get placed in when you slice through a view. If you cut a section through here, you'll see the grid lines that span this way. And then of course if you cut a section or an elevation that is viewing across here, then you'll see these grid lines over here. So we just want to make sure when we do have our grid lines that the vertical part of this actually comes up to the highest level. If you go up to the roof level here and this grid line hasn't literally been pulled up to that level, it won't show up in the level, because this grid line has to cut the level line in order to show up in the floor plan based on that level. So if you have a penthouse level and the grid line doesn't get pulled up, and the way you pull it up is you go to one of your elevations. So let's look at this grid line here. What is it? It's grid line D. So watch what's going to happen. If we go to our, let's go to this elevation over here. So I'm hoping this will be the east elevation. That's good. And there's our grid line D. Now watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the lock off so I don't pull the other grid lines down. And I'm going to grab that hollow 3D point. Watch, I'm going to pull it down here so that it's just barely above, I think, what is this level, which is level 2. So watch. If I go to level 2 HVAC, I'm going to see grid line D because it crosses it. And there is my grid line D. Okay, now watch what happens when I go up to level 3 HVAC. All of a sudden, I don't see grid line D. If I go up to the roof level, I'm not going to see it definitely. Okay, so watch. I'm going to go back to that east elevation. I'm going to grab my D and I'm going to pull it up to be one more level up. Now it's going to be on the second but not on the roof. So if I go up here and go, or it's going to be on the third. So all of a sudden it's back on the third, but if I go to the roof level, it's not going to show up. So that's just a little sampling of what we'll teach you when we talk about grid lines. But they do have to crisscross each other to show up in each other's views. And that's it for grid lines for now. You view them in plan, in elevation, and in section. And when you place them, they can be arced or they can be angled. And then you can control how the endpoints are. And you manage their location by placing dimensions in here in between. And then the dimensions will control the spacing. So we'll get down to that when we start to lay out some of our own new grid lines.